Hello and welcome to the Washington Foreign Press Center. Thank you for coming. Please turn off your cell phones and electronic devices at this time. I'd like to welcome you. I'm Andrew Strike. I'm the Defense Press Liaison here at the Foreign Press Center. And today we have retired Colonel Rick Kiernan, who was formerly the press officer for General Schwarzkopf during the First Gulf War. Today we're going to talk informally about how to cover the Pentagon and the Defense Department. This is not meant to be a policy or a news briefing. Neither the colonel nor myself are U.S. government spokespeople, but we're happy to explain how to cover the Pentagon and share all of our experiences and insights. And the colonel is happy to do interviews with anyone who is interested afterwards as time permits. Here is Colonel Kiernan.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm very happy to be with you today. As Andy mentioned, I used to be the Pentagon spokesman, and so during that period of the First Gulf War, I would frequently come over here to the Foreign Press Center. So I want to say thank you for everything that you do. I quickly realized, working in the Pentagon, how important the Foreign Press Center was as far as reaching out, getting the word out, if you will, around the world. And more importantly, as a public affairs officer, I always felt that any time I could interact with the media like we are today, that provides valuable feedback to me as a spokesperson. So I think any time you're going to have media relationships, it's important to be both on the dissemination as well as on the receive. I wanted to talk a few moments today about methodology, about process, because when you are stationed here in Washington, sometimes it can be a cacophony, and you wonder who the spokespeople are, and you wonder how you're going to get the most important information for your various countries back home. And so I thought I would describe for you a little bit the process, at least within the Pentagon, and how we interface with the State Department and also the other agencies within the government. For those of you that may have been in the Pentagon for a visit, you will find it is a very transparent and a very accessible venue. We have probably the largest office building in the world. About 27,000 people go to work each day at the Pentagon. And if you're inside, you know it just has hallways and hallways, and there's about 17 miles of hallways. But you will also notice if you go down the 7th corridor, we have a special portion of the building which is devoted to the press, and we call that the Correspondence Corner. And so you will find there the different agencies that are represented, as they call the Pentagon correspondents, and they're very accessible to almost anybody in the building. So while it is often the policy to go through a spokesperson for access, you will find that those correspondents who are accredited to the building have access to almost everybody, whether it's a person in uniform or a person who works for the government. So I think the accessibility is very, very important, at least here in the United States. And I think it says a lot about how hard and how vital we hold up the First Amendment and the freedom of the press and freedom of speech. And I think that accuracy goes along with transparency. And I think it's important to remember that one of the principles upon which Department of Defense Public Affairs operates is maximum disclosure and minimum delay. And I think that's an important principle. It's an important tenet because it says several things. Maximum disclosure means that within certain rules of propriety or policy or security, you are going to get the information that you have requested in the most expeditious way. I think also it shows that we are very, very cognizant and very sensitive to your deadlines. We are also very cognizant of the fact that you work and have bureaus and home stations in different time zones. And so it's very, very important for us to do that. And I know during the time that I was in the building, from 1989 to 1992, it was a very exciting time. We had the situation in Panama in December of '89, and then as we got into 1990 and the summer of '90, we began to get into the situation in the Middle East with the line in the sand, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then in '91, actually, the first Gulf War, and then back. So it was an exciting time to be there. Also during that time that I was in the building, it was a very exciting time for Eastern Europe, and there were a lot of changes in government. And one of the most momentous occasions I had was in October of '91, where I had occasion to go over and visit Russia, the former Soviet Union, and I had an opportunity to visit with the editors of TASS and Pravda and Avestia. So all in all, I came away from the assignment with a tremendous appreciation for the international media and the importance of what you do. Following the time I did spend in the Pentagon, I had the opportunity to work in Atlanta for the Olympics from '93 to '96, and once again had a good appreciation for the media from about 193 countries that came down to cover the Olympics, and I know you're anticipating another one now over in Beijing. So all in all, I think that if you step back and look at what a public affairs officer can do in order to facilitate your job, I would mention 2 or 3 things. First of all, the public affairs officer is not a barrier to information. He or she facilitates it. I always saw my job when I was on active duty as being a bridge between the media and between the military that I served. Whether I was at an installation like Fort Bragg or Fort Jackson, or even up in Alaska at Fort Wainwright, or here in the Pentagon, I always saw my role as to be the bridge builder. Very often, the public affairs officer takes your request for an interview, a story that you want to cover. He then has to go to his boss and present your story and say, here is why I think this is a good story. Here is why I see this is significant. Here is why I think this is newsworthy. And so a lot of times, the public affairs officer has to, as we say in America, carry the water for the reporter. Conversely, I think we are able to be sensitive to your deadline by quickly finding for you the subject matter expert. And I think that is the most important role that a public affairs officer does. You can be the person who has a very, very general knowledge of something as big as the Pentagon, or in my case, the United States Army. But if you want to do a particular story about training, then it's my job to find that person within the Pentagon organization who is the person who can handle the aspect of training that you would like to describe. Maybe you're doing a story on technology and you want to see how much simulation has affected training in the Army. Or maybe you want to do a story about vehicles and you want to see the transition of Humvees or Bradley fighting vehicles, or perhaps the impact of IEDs, et cetera. Once the public affairs officer has a good discussion with you, has a good appreciation for where you're going as far as your story goes, and really what your theme is going to be. What is the intended message that you would like to carry to your audience, whether it's a visual audience in television, or whether it's going to be a published piece, it's going to be in a newspaper, or even radio, which is a very, very hot medium, as you know. So when you come with a request, the more detail that you can give the public affairs officer, I think that will really help facilitate what you're trying to get to very quickly. I would also share that if we shifted from the Pentagon and we went overseas, for example, when I left the Pentagon to go over to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia, it was important for me as I worked with the media to talk about 3 things. First of all, there was the accreditation. You had to be accredited in order to cover the Desert Shield or the Desert Storm. And that accreditation was done in cooperation and coordination with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And I think for the American media at times, they had to understand that in our country, our form of government, which is a republic, is a little different than a kingdom or a monarchy. And so if you are accredited for a 30 or a 60 or a 90-day visa, in order to do work over in Saudi Arabia, as was the case, you have to be sensitive to where you are, to the venue, and to the host nation, as we say. And so as the director of the Joint Information Bureau in Saudi Arabia, at that particular time, I had the benefit of working not only with the American media, but with a lot of media representatives from the countries that you represent right here today. And so we had to make sure that we also followed the rules of the host nation as far as accessibility and providing access to the story. Some of the media chose to receive regular briefings, as they do in the Pentagon on Tuesdays or Thursday afternoons, or in some cases overseas, they preferred to go by vehicle, military vehicle sometimes, actually to go out and visit with the units themselves. There's pros and cons to both sides. If you decide to be embedded, if you decide to be attached to a particular unit, Army or Navy or Air Force or Marine, and there's nothing going on in that particular sector or in that particular part of the war that day, there may be nothing for you to report. On the other hand, if you're back at the cantonment area and you're receiving a regular scheduled briefing, you might get more context. You might be able to then get the big picture as to what happened within the last 12 or 24 hours. And then, armed with that information, you can go to the public affairs officer and say, in addition to the normal combat activity, I see an aspect or I see a particular piece of this story that I would like to pursue. Maybe it's logistics. Maybe it's how many thousands of gallons of gasoline does it take for all of these tanks to go across a desert? Or how do you feed as many as 500,000 people? How do you provide for their security? So some aspect of it you can take, because covering a war is a very complex situation. But I think, once again, one of the more valuable contributions that a public affairs officer can make for you is to help you get to the subject matter expert who can provide that information for you. One of the things I think is very important to note also is the contrast between the first Gulf War and the situation we have now for the last 4 years. So I think embedding and having the journalist experience the daily life of the soldiers and the airmen and the Marines that are over there gives yet another perspective to the reader or to the viewing audience back home. And I think that particularly expands the story. So rather than hearing it through a third party or through an instrument, you're actually getting the sights and the sounds, and it's more of a visceral approach as you go into that. I think it's important to remember also, if you're overseas and you're covering a particular story, the public affairs officer can be your friend in that they will provide security for you, they will provide transportation for you, they will provide, in many cases, lodging or even rations. So I think the public affairs officer takes very, very good care of the media. I have always seen it as a symbiotic relationship where we depend on each other. I have always respected the media of all outlets and all nations because you have the most vital role of carrying information back to the families, back to the relatives, and back to all of the audiences who could be affected by what you're covering. So it's very, very important that that relationship and that dialogue be open and candid and frank. And it's important for the public affairs officer to appreciate that and to have respect for the media as they cover their stories. I think conversely, a public affairs officer is someone you can trust as an ally because he is the one or she is the one who can open the door and provide the access. And for a journalist, there's nothing more important than access. You can be sitting outside but not invited to the party, and it's very hard to report on the party. I'll give you an example. When I was director of press operations in Atlanta, for those of you that might have an occasion to go to an Olympics, it's a tremendous opportunity. And you have a very limited number of accredited media that attend the media. And those that are accredited, is about 5,000 of them, will go, of course, to the sports venues, and there's usually about 25 or 30 sports. However, there's a lot of media who are not accredited to go to the stadium or go to the equestrian or the aquatic events, but they will still cover the games. And so it is very, very important that they have access to the particular piece of the story that they may want to tell within the Olympiad. So there are some contrasts between special event planning and coverage and actually covering the Pentagon. Here in Washington, I think it's important to know that you are very, very fortunate to have the Foreign Press Center here. It is a vital, vital piece of the puzzle, and I mean that sincerely. I've known a lot of the directors before Andy, and I know how hard they work in order to give you not only the immediacy of what's in the news picture today and what's in the news hole tomorrow, but they also try during your tenure here to give you an appreciation for what America's all about. I was born in Brooklyn and in the Army for 26 years, traveled around to many of your countries. I was in Alaska, I was in Hawaii, I was in the former Soviet Union, I was in Germany, my very first assignment, and so I've had an opportunity to see the world. That being said, I know that America is not all 495. It's not all within the Beltway. And I know you do have, through the auspices of the Foreign Press Center, the opportunities to go out and see America and to see some of the states and to see some of the regions in our country. And I hope that you enjoy those opportunities to do that. I would like to pause and take a few questions so that I can cover one of the things that would be of interest to you, whether it's coverage of the military here in the Pentagon, how you go about it through the desk officers, or if you had a particular installation that you wanted to visit. As I mentioned before, you might want to go to North Carolina to Fort Bragg, where the special ops are and the paratroopers. You might want to go to Fort Jackson and do a story on basic training, what's it like to be indoctrinated and come into the service. Or you may want to go to Fort Hood or the National Training Center or whatever it may be. Most places, the public affairs officer is going to be the portal. That's going to be the office that's going to get you in the door. They're going to provide escort for you, and they're going to facilitate your visit. Try not to consider that somebody watching you. Try not to consider, well, they're listening to the questions or whatever. Believe me, it's access, because I can tell you as a former Army colonel, the military is very, very proud of the soldiers, just as the Navy and the Marines and the Airmen are of the people that serve in their forces. And I think when you are very proud of the people who do so very, very much for our country and our nation, you're very proud to tell the story. And so if anything, you want to throw the doors open and let all of you wonderful reporters come in and visit with us. So I'll be happy to take some questions, and perhaps they can be more specific than to some of the things I've mentioned in a general way.
I would add, please wait for the microphone, which could be coming from either side of you as is most convenient, and state your name and publication. And also we have folks in New York, so we may call on them via digital video if they have questions. So and finally, I may want to add additional information, because I know all of the techie little details about how to apply for base visits or how to get embedded and all this stuff. So I may want to follow up on some of Rick's answers, but please ask your questions. Take it away.
Hi, Gonzalo Spadis from the German Newswire. Thanks for this opportunity.
Yes,
I want to take advantage of your experience in your contact with the press, and obviously in the military. I moved very recently, and I noticed there's a completely different sensitivity towards the military in this country to what I'm used to. So one of my worries when I try to contact the Pentagon is, what are the topics, what are the questions that you shouldn't be asking? Not the question, but what are the topics, so that I can know those topics and try to formulate the question the proper way? Because obviously the goal is to get an answer, right? What are the topics that really annoy the military in this country? Especially, especially from your experience with foreign press, right?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes. First of all, and I mean this sincerely, I can't think of any topic that would be annoying. I always, as a reporter, I have also been on your side of the room. I've been the editor of 3 newspapers, I've been the editor of a magazine, and I've had a public television show, so I know what it's like to sit out there. I think it's how you craft your question. For example, you said you're from Germany.
I'm actually from Spain.
Oh, Spain. Yeah. But you're working for a German outlet?
Yes.
Okay. I would think maybe a desk officer might think that if someone from Western Europe, as we say, was going to call with a question, they might automatically think maybe it's NATO related. They may try and give it that type of context. You, I think, would remember your audience, who you're writing for. And so I think it's more important than worrying about the question to worry about your audience and the information you want to give to them. In other words, you become their ombudsman. What are the people who are in my readership? What is it they would like to know about the Pentagon? And as I said at the offset, Is there a particular aspect? The more specific you can be to the desk officer, the easier it is. And I'll tell you why. We all have human nature. In the Pentagon, there is a constant turnover. Most of the officers are there for 3 years. Within that 3 years, they may have 3 different jobs. So the hardest thing in Washington, whether you're working with an embassy or you're working with the Pentagon or you're working with the State Department, is to get the desk officer. You may develop a relationship with a particular desk officer at the Pentagon, and then sure enough, after 3 months, he or she is reassigned, and then you have to build a new relationship with them. Once you can be very specific, that helps them. If it's a very general question, while not annoying, it makes it more difficult for them to research. How brave are the American soldiers compared to the soldiers who fought in Vietnam? That would be a hard question to research. It might have context, which is historical, as compared with if there are going to be budget reductions for 2008, as is very much in the news today, what would be the impact on the production of a new weapon or of a new tank or something, if that had particular interest to you? And that's just a theoretical example that I give you. But the more specific you can be, the desk officer can then go through his liaison and say, aha, this is a question about tanks. I need to go to the automotive person. Because remember, in the building, there is somebody who knows everything about barbed wire. There is someone else who knows everything about ammunition. There is somebody who knows everything about helicopters. Very, very smart men and women. So the more specific, I think, helps them do it. And I think the second thing, sir, is I would say to them, and I would phrase this, hello, good morning. I am writing a story for my particular outlet, and you would, whatever it is, the newspaper, and I'm trying to focus on research and development. And although technology is important, I'm wondering if, within a restricted budget, any of the new weapon systems will be affected. And this is the most important piece of information. I'm writing for a periodical, so my deadline is next week, rather than I am writing for a newspaper and my deadline is 3 o'clock. That makes it hard. However, if you can give them the deadline, that helps them tremendously. I'll tell you why. I'll give you a piece of information from the desk officer's point of view, and when I was a colonel, how I instructed my desk officers. It would be foolish of me to receive a call from you and to hang it up and disregard it. You know why? If I don't respect your deadline, if I don't come back to you with the most accurate information that I'm permitted, within the deadline ability to give you, you have an editor who is pressing you to get the story written. You're going to make your deadline because you're not going to have an empty hole in the paper. You're going to go to somebody else. You're going to go to another source of information to meet your deadline, and it'll be published. The desk officer will then have to spend more time and burn more calories correcting the record and refuting what is incorrect. So Rick Kiernan's opinion is get the question, get the answer, get it right.
I would say as a follow-up that one of the services, the FPC stands sort of as a middle ground in between foreign media and the Defense Department. At least that's my role. I work for state, but I on any given day, I'm lobbying for media, I'm lobbying for the Defense Department, or I'm lobbying for a state on a given issue. And it changes moment by moment, and I translate and I explain actually the different cultures, which is a large part of my role. I explain to the military what they're not getting, or what's behind the language in which you phrase a question, and I'm happy to do the same to explain what it is you're looking for from the Pentagon. So please, if you think you've got a sensitive question, you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or if you just don't know, frankly, if you just don't know the acronyms to use to ask your question, because everything in the Pentagon has about 4 acronyms, come to me. I may not know myself, but I'll probably have a decent idea, or at least I can pick up the phone and call people. So use me as much as you like to. I'd also say that in my absence, there's a page on the FPC website, fpc.state.gov. There's a link that says Department of Defense contact information, and on that page is huge and has publicly available contact information for virtually every conceivable military command in this country and overseas. So if you don't get a hold of me and you want to research, a medical issue or a reserve component issue or anything under the sun, it's mostly on that page, the people you need to talk to. So first try me, get my explanation if you can, and if not, go to the internet page and get your information there. So I think that's that question. We have a journalist from New York. So please go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you. My name is Régis Osomia. I am the senior correspondent for Parimatch in the US. I have a question about the embed program in Iraq. Over the course of the past 2 years, I was embedded 3 times on 3 different occasions in Iraq, and the second time was back in November of '06. I had to go through the biometrics. And so that took me, the whole process of getting my biometrics and getting the information makes you lose 3 days. I was wondering if it is taken into account that the fact for any reporter to go to Iraq actually takes you already 3 days, at least. If you get your visa, you have to get your visa in Amman, and then you have to go fly commercially to Baghdad. But that thing made me lose 3 days, plus the time also to get to a unit. Now, I mean, that time can be shortened if you know a commander or colonel who you've already been embedded with, which happened to me the last time. That eases the process. But the biometrics be done before departure, like in the US, so that we don't lose that time?
I'm not an expert on embedding and at that level of technical detail. Having been embedded 3 times, you probably know more about it than I do, but I'm happy to take your question on board. And it makes perfect sense that some of these things can be done in the United States. I know I regularly refer our correspondents when they're considering embedding to go first to a unit based in this country that is about to go over and start the process in this country where you already are. That way, you're not doing what they call the 3,000-mile screwdriver, trying to arrange things in Baghdad or wherever while you're 3,000 miles away. It's much easier to be in this country and to travel to the home unit or base and meet the commander and the soldiers before they deploy, and then go over with them. And you can look at a unit over time and get a much more depth of understanding, and you can just drop in on that unit once you know them at whenever it's convenient for you and them, and I think that's one of the better ways to work it. I don't know anything more about the biometrics aspect of this, but if you send me an email, I'll be happy to look into it and see if that process isn't being expedited in some fashion. Hiroki? Oh, sorry. We can't hear you, New York.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we hear you.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that the embed program is really remarkable. I mean, once you reach the unit, it's impeccable, I think.
I would, of course. I mean, I think it's great. I would suggest any correspondent here can start the embed process today with me. Now I recognize that's not always necessarily possible because you've been stationed in Washington or New York, and you're here because you're here, and you can't always necessarily go off to Baghdad. But for any of you who can do so, you're more than I'd love to set it up, and I'd love to see you through the process. So I think that's it for New York. Go ahead with the next question.
Hello, Colonel.
Hello, sir.
I'm Hiroki Sugita with the Kyoto News, Japanese news wire.
Yes, sir.
I also have the embed reporting program, and I would like to ask you your experience in the first Gulf War, because we didn't see much of the embedding reporting in that war.
Right.
But now this war you did, or Pentagon did many times. So and it's not only for the U.S. journalists, but also open for the foreign journalists like us. And first of all, why didn't you do the having the journalists embedded in the unit or troops in the first Gulf War? And in your in your reflection, was it a plus for your operation in the first Gulf War? Not having the journalists embedded is a plus for your operation in the first Gulf War. And you are now not with the Pentagon, but what do you think? Why this time the Pentagon or U.S. military did much of the having journalists embedded? Was it a lesson learned from the first Gulf War? That's why this time they did embedded journalism.
That's a very good question. One of my very good friends, Mr. Brian Whitman, who works over at Department of Defense Public Affairs, worked very, very hard to establish the embed program for this current situation, and I think Brian has done a very good job along with the people that work over there. I would answer the question in two ways. Number one, the first Gulf War lasted 96 hours. It was 4 days. This is 4 years. So you had a very short time, and so perhaps having the media as a group, either in Riyadh or Dhahran, the two locations where they were in Saudi Arabia, was one reason to cover it, because I think the military goal at that time was to liberate Kuwait. So you had a very specific goal, and so you were able to measure it, contain it, if you will. When you have a longer period of time and you have a larger area, whether it's Baghdad, outside of Baghdad, and all the surrounding areas, and you have soldiers and units in different positions, etc., it is hard to get that focus, if you will, on one operation, one particular aspect of combat. So having embed, I think, helps give a broader coverage for the correspondent. So the good news is you can get many more correspondents into the units, and I think the benefit, as the gentleman in New York said, is that once you're with the soldiers, you get another whole assortment or story base. You can see the personalities, you can see the leadership, you can see the relationships, you can see the chain of command, you can see all of the things that go into what we call combat, rather than just, something on the outside where we're saying this is a battle. That being said, as I said in the beginning of this briefing, if you are embedded with a particular unit outside of Fallujah, you're going to be viewing the whole war through a straw. You're going to see a lot of Fallujah, and you're going to go deep rather than broad, which is fine. It goes back to the coverage, and it goes back to your objectives as a journalist. That is why very clearly in the first Gulf War, which was much shorter in duration, literally half preferred to stay and get the briefing in Dhahran each day, while the others preferred to be assigned to units, to the 82nd Airborne, to the Armored Division, to the Marine Divisions, or out even with the Navy on ships. So it's really the journalist, where do you want to go? There's pluses and minuses. When I was younger, I was an infantry officer. I was in Vietnam. And so I can tell you, when you are embedded with a unit, you are living with the unit in the heat, eating the same food, maybe enduring conditions that are a little different than being in a hotel. So it's the correspondent's decision. Do I want to be embedded, live the life of a soldier, and get the benefit of seeing the war through his or her eyes? On the other case, I can get both. I can travel out to see a particular aspect. I can have an interview with the colonel or a captain or a soldier, and then I can come back to the hotel and file my story. So it's how you want to package your coverage and get the most use of your time. The gentleman in New York made a very good point. If there's one industry that focuses on time, it's yours. That's why we call it a deadline. Time is very, very important to what you and I do as a spokesperson or a reporter. So I would say hindsight is very easy to say, 4 days versus 4 years. But remember, it's a very short military objective, and this has a different military objective. And now, of course, it has that military objective buoying or leading to, hopefully, a political situation as well. Yes.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I work with the Saudi press agency.
Yes. I've been in your country.
I'm actually not from Saudi, but amazingly, I haven't been to Saudi Arabia.
All right.
So
Right. You'd like it.
I have a little bit of experience with the military from covering Guantanamo Bay. But one of the things that I find very difficult is to get a sense of you talked about it partly, like the different acronyms and the structure of the military, and I'm wondering if there's a resource or a manual or something like that that you would recommend for a journalist, particularly just somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience with the military, to get a better sense of the different units and the different services.
Yes, I do, and thank you. That's a very good question, because every profession has its own vernacular, if you will. The medical profession has it, the legal profession has it, the military has it, and so acronyms are just, shortcuts and abbreviation to do things very, very quickly. I would say, as Andy has said, I would start with a home page. If you go to Defense Link, that's going to help you. And then from the Defense Link, that's going to break it down to Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine. And you can almost build yourself by printing out some of those pages, a primer for yourself. Secondly, I would challenge whoever you're working with as a public affairs officer. I always felt was my job was to demilitarize the language and not have to talk in Pentagonese. And even at my own staff meetings, I would encourage my fellow colonels and generals who would start using acronyms. I'd say, excuse me, I have to translate this for the reporter. What does that mean? Tell me what that is. I'm an infantryman. I don't understand short tons and long tons and ROPU units for reverse osmosis, to take water and make it pure. So explain that to me so that I can then explain it to the reporter. And so once again, I felt a bridge. But I would say use your public affairs officer and that office, if you will. They are very, very happy to give an orientation. They are very, very happy to have you visit with them. And very, very happy to help you understand it. The second thing I would suggest is that there is a plethora of publications. Army Magazine is good. The Marine Gazette is good. Army Aviation. Normally, and this is a good start for reporters, if you want to do story on a particular aspect of leadership or a helicopter or a vehicle, almost always in a periodical, it will take those acronyms and break them down and give you an understanding of that topic, not just a knowledge of it. But these acronyms can be a barrier to communication. But I would start with Defense Link, break that down, and then almost every installation explains its story. If you go to Fort Benning, you have infantry and airborne. If you go to Fort Bragg, you have special ops and Green Berets. If you go to Fort Knox, they have a new general, by the way, Fort Knox. If you go there, you get all about the tanks. If you go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, it's all about artillery. So if you know in your mind, I'm back to my first point, what you want to write about for your audience back home, and maybe contrast it, with SANG. There's one for you, right? SANG. And so you may be something going on for your Saudi audience that you want to contrast here. I would start, the periodicals are very, very helpful. And there's so much online now that you can, with the click of a button, get there. But don't let them scare. I still have to go look up acronyms.
I'll follow up with a few things, and then I'll give you a little more ammunition. I think, official sources are best. You're less likely to get things wrong by checking Defense Link or all the other websites that we've both referred you to. I would also say that there are places to get good information on the internet. Always take it with a grain of salt, but I would go to Wikipedia can sometimes be good. and there's a couple of other sites. I mean, just Google and then talk to your public affairs officer and confirm that you've gotten it. You've gotten the understanding correct. Also, it may not help, but on a it may help on a day-to-day level. If we have the Early Bird here, we have Army Times, we have all of these publications, and if you have the chance to skim through that on a daily basis, or just pick whichever one is the most useful to you. If you read news clips on a daily basis, some of the acronyms will sink in and the culture will sink in, and you'll find if you do that regularly, then you'll start to get it, and it'll be easier to get your questions answered. Now you have a follow-up.
No, I'm just curious. I'm just curious about how new recruits, when they join the military, learn about all of these things. That's why I sort of asked about whether there was some sort of manual or resource that they give them.
I'm glad you asked.
Thank you.
Yeah, my daughter just finished Fort Jackson, so and now she's a PFC, going to be a PAO in training, so takes a picture of everything, and I'm very proud of her. And she's over at Fort Myer with the old guard, so they have the unknown soldier and all those ceremonial. But they do give the basic training, the recruits, a primer or a soldier handbook, if you will, and it has a description of the ranks, and it has a description of the organizations of a squad and a platoon, and the different organizational things as well. So I will see if I can locate one of those, and I'll get it to Andy, and maybe we could keep it here in the FPC research library. I did think of one other source for all of you, though. If you represent countries who have, of course, embassies here in town, one of the folks that I work with all the time are the defense attachés. They're wonderful folks to work with. And you'll find in some of the cases they'll have a naval attaché, they'll have an army attaché, an air marshal or whatever. And you have the benefit there of dealing with someone from your own nation. Secondly, they probably have a counterpart, people that they deal with in the Allied section over at the Pentagon. And so if you say to them, and you would come from a common set of reference, I want to do a story about this and that, can you refer me to somebody? And I don't understand what ABC XYZ stands for, and they would probably give you a good understanding. So don't dismiss your defense attachés from your respective embassies. They're great guys and girls.
I would follow up also and say that whenever you send an email to the military, CC me. It's not, again, because, as Rick was saying, that we want to watch you and we want to everything that you're doing. But if I can see something that hasn't been explained on either end of the conversation, I can come back to you and say, oh, this is what what the person you're speaking to really means, or I can do the same thing for you to them, and I can just write a short note saying, don't be scared off by this foreign journalist who's writing you, he or she has been based in Washington for X number of years and has done this, that, and the other thing. So please, I encourage you to include me on any and all correspondence, and I try and help in small ways like that. Also, we have another question from New York. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Lalit Jha, I write for Pajwak Afghan News, a voice service from Kabul. And Pentagon is very important for us. Being based in New York, how best I can cover Pentagon from here, who should be my contact person, and how quickly I can get transcripts of the press conferences, regular briefings, and who should be my contact person in Pentagon for, on issues related to Afghanistan.
I can help you with that. The U.S. Army Public Affairs System has a liaison office in New York City. And when this briefing is over, I will get with Andy, and if you give him your contact information, probably about 4 or 5 blocks from where you are in Manhattan, there is an Army Public Affairs Liaison Office, and all the services are represented. And their job is to be a liaison for you and to facilitate you getting information about the Army. Also, you said you're with the Afghan outlets?
Pajwak Afghan News is the wire service for Afghanistan.
I understand. If you do have contact through your service back there too, within the Ministry of Defense for the ANA, for the Afghan Army, is a General Azimi, and he understands very, very well how to get the information relative to some of the questions you might have. He is a very, very good, knowledgeable public affairs officer for the Afghan Army.
Thank Thank you.
I would follow up and say that that Army office, I believe, is right across, it's less than a block away from where you are right now. And also, I mean, not just for Afghanistan, but for any country or any region of the world, I'm happy to share, you know, the contact information for desk officers at the various services, the, you know, just the folks that I work with directly. I can put you in direct touch with them to the extent that I can. I have a whole Rolodex, and I'll give out as much information as I'm permitted to do, and you can deal directly in many cases. So if you have a specific, you know, if you want to know someone who works NATO issues or Afghan issues or whatever, let me know, and I'll give you such information as I know, and help you in any way that I can. Did you have a follow-up? Okay. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nadia Cha, Washington correspondent for Liberty Times, Taiwan. I have a question. Maybe Andrew could, better answer this. I've been here for a few years, and first of all, foreign correspondents was allowed to go to Pentagon to cover the stories and get a credential Pentagon, even though they are not daily stationed there. Because for many foreign correspondents, it's just hard to be there every day because we cover more than just Pentagon. But after 911, they tightened the security, and many of the times, we have to wait there for escort. And Pentagon's briefing sometimes always came to the last minute notification. It makes very difficult for us just, go to the gate and waiting for the escort. Sometimes we miss the briefing time. I wonder, is it possible, to improve this and make it like a State Department? We can present our, foreign presenter credential and get a temporary credential to go to the Pentagon.
We are working on, your concerns are our concerns, and we're working on these issues to the extent that we can. The Pentagon access, as I understand it, and Rick may have some follow-ups here, but you can go at any time to Defense Link and apply for a Pentagon press pass, but there are some of the rules for that are somewhat restricting in that you have to agree to spend X number of hours in the Pentagon, and there are security requirements, et cetera. And so some of you may be unable to take the pass because you can't spend the time at the desk in the Pentagon, and this is a point that we have raised and we will continue to raise with our military colleagues. But what you can do, you can attend any Pentagon event by going 45 minutes before to the north parking lot and meet an escort officer who will take you to the event and then take you back to the parking lot afterwards. That's the general practice. And if there's something really important, if there's something, please come to me and ask if you need anything more, or if you need, if you really want to go to an event and there's something special and you'd like the FPC to take a group, this we can do. We're always happy to get involved when you tell us that there's a need to get involved. So, I have taken reporters to the Pentagon many times, and will gladly do it more if there are specific issues. And I don't know what to do about the short time of some announcements. I guess when news breaks for you or for the military, it breaks, and everyone has to scramble to react to it. So, I raised the concerns that you've mentioned, but I don't know if there's anything to do, that we can change the current state of the 24/7 news cycle. Did you have a?
Yeah, two thoughts. Number one, have you ever been there? Okay. Well, then, I was going to say make a recon. Go one time. Specific request. I represent this news agency in Taiwan. I want to do a story on this, and I'd like to set an interview. What that does is it gives you a sense of the time. When I visit the Pentagon now, probably there are no more at any time. If I have to hop a train and go over, I've never had to wait more than 5 or 6 people in line. So it does move very quickly. Better than it did, let's say, a year or two ago when they were still working out the queue.
Vastly better.
Vastly better, vastly quicker. Secondly, what I would do is, as Andy has suggested, There are regular briefings. They used to be Tuesday and Thursday at 1300 or 1 o'clock. Now, if something breaks on an emergency, they can be any day of the week at any time. But I would say if you go as a group, that number one, it gives you a good feel for the building, for those that have not been there before. The drive time, the logistics, waiting, et cetera, how to go from point A to point B. It's a big building. It's a big place. But if you have a specific story that you want to pursue, once again, as I said at the beginning, get your story, get your point. I want to speak to this person about that topic, and my deadline is, boom. Then they can work that as an individual request. You'll have a public affairs officer to meet you, escort you, and take you to it. I would do that. In other words, you kind of play chicken and egg. You know, I want to be there when the news breaks, and I don't want to miss the opportunity. But it's like a relationship. If you've already gone through 1 or 2 times on a story, then all of a sudden you get to know them, they get to know you, and you get to know when is it's like driving in Washington. When is the best time to get on the Beltway? When is the best time to wait 20 minutes later and I can get home half as fast? I would just do a couple of recons.
I was once even got granted a credential, but because, as you said, people rotated every,
Yep, that's it.
several years. The people then will, leave soon, and you have the new people you have to be acquainted with. So I'm just thinking about, you have to go through the whole process again, and because the requirement is just sometimes very difficult for foreign, correspondent to be there with so much, the amount of time they request. Thanks.
I understand, and we've passed on, and we agree with your concerns there, and we've passed that on to the Pentagon, and we're still in discussions with them. I don't know that anything can be changed, but we've let them know how their procedures, how that they can sometimes make things difficult for foreign media. Go on.
I was just going to ask whether it would be possible in the circumstance that she's talking about, because I've certainly also been frustrated by discovering that a briefing is happening, 45 minutes after I get an email, to broadcast the briefing here in the Foreign Press Centre. I know that you often do simultaneous broadcasts of briefings or of addresses, and I wondered whether that would be something that you could arrange to get around that problem.
We can do that anytime, pretty much. You can also watch all of their events on Pentagon Channel TV, which you can watch on the internet anytime. So that's another option.
First, I would like to thank for this opportunity, and I would like to thank Andy and other military PAO people who helped me a lot to reach out the appropriate people who are interested, who are familiar with the issue that I was interested in. And just one thing I always wonder, the time for interview. Usually, time for interview is set within an hour, and sometimes I'm also interested in touring the facility and also like to take photos. And so sometimes it's too short, and I always wonder if there is kind of an internal rule to finish this kind of interview within an hour, or maybe for just foreign press.
Would that be at the Pentagon, ma'am? At the time is at the Pentagon for the interview?
I have been to several
Installations?
military bases.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I would say a couple of things. I know when I was at Fort Bragg, it was a very popular spot for the media to visit because of all the activity. We never had a set time unless it was driven by the number of reporters. If we had these many reporters in this room who wanted to come cover a court-martial, it is probably hard during that same event to give the update on the court-martial, to do the stand-up that you might require, and then to go ahead and have a short tour of the base. So I would say in those cases, if it's a news-driven story, I would do that first. But when there is no news, once again, I would do the recon. If you happen to be going to Fort Jackson, just to get an overall tour. They have, within every public affairs office, 3 types of mission. First is to do community relation, which is tours, orientations for the media, as well as for outreach, for people in the community that want to learn more about that particular base, what they do. The second is what we're doing right now, media relations, answering questions, responding to query, putting out news releases. And then the third aspect is more internal, and that's where someone in the office puts out the base newspaper, whether it's online or a hard copy. But I would say build the relationship. I'm very, very big on relationships. Get to know the people, they get to know you. So when there's nothing hot going on and you have discretionary time and they have some time, Christmas is a good time. Between now and the 1st of January is a wonderful time to visit anywhere because usually things have quieted down. You have time to sit, have a cup of coffee or tea or whatever, and you get to know them, they get to know you. You'll find public affairs people are very gregarious. They love to talk, they love to visit, they love to meet new people. That's why we're in the business we're in. So I would build the relationship first so that when something urgent does come and you dial the phone, they go, oh, it's my friend, and they know you already. Instead of you having to introduce yourself, sell yourself, give them why it's significant that you be there. I'm always big on building relationships first when things are quiet, so when they're not so quiet, you're there.
I would follow up to say, I know that you're constantly being tasked by your editors and you don't always know what you need, but to the extent that you know that you're going to want background on something, or ask all of your questions with as much lead time as you possibly can and give as much information. So if you want an interview plus a tour of the base, be sure you make sure that everyone you talk to knows that you want the tour along with the interview and not just the interview. And then I would also follow up, we who work in big bureaucratic organizations know some of the challenges of them and recognize that, you're dealing with a big bureaucracy and you're going to be passed through many different hands. You're going to work with the public affairs officer, you're going to work with their staff. If you go to a base, you might go out to a training range. Every person in that chain, make sure that they understand what you're there for in every single part of your request. And watch your public affairs officer and everyone, when they're talking amongst themselves and saying what you're going to get on a particular visit, make sure that everything you want to be conveyed is conveyed. And before you leave, the public affairs officer will hand you off to someone at a range or some such thing, and make sure that everything that you understand you're going to get is understood by the person that you're going to. And just treat every time you move from one box in the organization to another, go through that process and make sure that where you're going to understands what you're going to get and that there's no confusion. It's very tedious, but it's a lifesaver for getting the story.
Let me add one thing I think may be helpful. Going back to the gentleman's question on is there anything annoying, if you can, in the beginning of the process, send the email to, I'll use Fort Bragg again, Colonel Buckner, Billy Buckner. He's in my old chair where I used to be. Colonel Buckner, I represent this agency. I would like to visit and I would like to do an interview on these topics: special operations, paratroopers, the medical facility. I am available in the following window of time, 10 December through 14 December. I will travel on my own, I will come visit with you, and I have already done some research. Please let me know if this is convenient. That tells him everything he needs to know. He has a window of time, he knows what you want to come. You, if possible, send it on letterhead, from your organization so that they know it's a legitimate request. Then he will come right back to you and say, we have some training on the 10th and 11th, 12th and 13th is good. You begin to narrow it down. I have identified a subject matter expert for you who can answer your questions. If you will come to Gate 3 on Bragg Boulevard, I will have somebody meet you at 10 o'clock. The more you can give in that very first email, as Andy has said, that helps them tremendously, rather than a phone call, which is, who are you, what would you like, then there's 5 more phone calls, and each time because of familiarity, whatever, the story begins to finally crystallize. If you have in your mind what you want, it is very easy to process.
Yeah, there I would follow up and I would say it's use both the phone and email and use them thoughtfully and strategically. There are times where, email isn't read and a phone call breaks through and makes a human connection. There are other times when, the government, again, is a big bureaucracy and it moves on whether emails and attachments and photos and all that stuff have been received in an illegible format and all that nonsense. So use both and be strategic. And again, I'll say it for maybe the 5th time today. CC me on everything, and that I really do for about 90+% of your emails. As I see them go by, I write a little 1 or 2 liner to the installation PAO, letting them know that you're not some foreign stranger. You're someone who's known. And I see some people nodding heads in agreement. So yeah, I Okay, next question.
Yeah, I was wondering. You were talking. You almost started telling us not to be scared, to think that somebody's watching you all the time, and I was wondering, mostly out of curiosity, because I guess there's nothing we can do. But how does it work in the clearance and in terms of I send a question to a desk officer that I want an answer, but some high official or a high high official, and how does it work? Where does my question go to and through?
The way it works is the desk officers, I like to use metaphor, very easy for me. The metaphor I would use would be a reference librarian. When I was the Pentagon spokesman, I had 4 desk officers. I was a colonel. They were majors or lieutenant colonels. They have accounts, A through B, C through F, whatever. So if the question was on personnel, anything to do with people, the Army's greatest resource is people. So I had one person, and all she did, lieutenant colonel, was people questions, awards, promotions, discharges, hardship, health, anything to do with the person, the soldier, the uniform, what rank, what insignia, what beret. So by coming to me with a general question, you immediately go to Barbara. The next question might be on tanks. Maybe the tank is going to be modified with protection on the sides for IEDs. That was the man next to her. He had all the vehicle questions. The next person might have questions about operations or tactics or units or which reserve unit is called up from Fort Drum to go to Baghdad, to go to Afghanistan, whatever. So just by coming to work every day, you could not imagine a normal day, average, nothing happening for me, 300 emails. Easy. 300, easy, every day. That's a normal day. Busy day, more. So you have a system established where you get it to the person quickly, just like you go to a library. I want to know where a book is about Goethe. You go over there to German literature. I need something over here about, rivers in Amazon. You go over here to rivers. So they become reference librarians. The other thing is that you may change and turn over, but they may have heard the same question on the same topic 10 times that day. When that occurs, we go to what we call FAQ, frequently asked questions. And the reason we do that is that if it affects the policy, Army policy, we don't shoot from the hip. We don't just come up with an answer and say, what about this? Well, I think 3 is a good number. There are certain things that are very specific. We have so many divisions in the Army. We have so many soldiers, 480,000, whatever it may be. The recruiting goal for November was 12,000, whatever. So those things take time to research. But each month, if you are the recruiting person, you know that you're going to get a question from the media about, did the Army make its recruiting goal? The Marines did you? You may answer that question 12 times this morning. So some of the questions are quantifiable or factual. Others are qualified. Type of training, stress on training, hardship discharges, medical things, whatever. When you get into people things, then individuals. So it's not who asks the question, but the process is the question comes in, it goes to the appropriate person in the Pentagon, and the way I did it is I kept a liaison. So remember, and this is, I think, pretty good, for the whole Army to answer all the questions, I had 4 people. That's a big Army. So I then had a big org chart, and so within that there's a whole section that does personnel, another one that does logistics, another one that does training, another one that does aviation. In those boxes on the org chart, I would have a liaison. And once a month, I would bring my liaison officers in. And I would say to them, here are the trends. This is going on in the real world. I think the media will have interest in these 4 things. So get ready. So when I call you, you're not just beginning the race. You're already on the way. So it's constantly, and I said this at the beginning of this briefing, one of the reasons I love to come visit with Andy in the Foreign Press Center and you folks is its feedback. So the more you talk with the media is a source for information. See, many times you see the public affairs person as the source. Not so. When that phone rings, you're giving me information by the question you ask.
I would follow up by you are asking who answers my question, and I would come back with who are you asking your question to, which is an important consideration. You should ask the person that's most appropriate, to answer, or you're not going to get an answer. If you ask the Navy about an Army issue, your email or phone call will be ignored. And obviously, it's far more complicated than that. Usually, if I'm here to translate and to explain how the military thinks about things, but it's helpful if you can learn, what is a policy question that goes to a civilian Pentagon official versus what is a military question that goes to someone in a uniform. What is a question that's better answered by someone in Baghdad? If you ask it in the Pentagon, you're not going to. All they're going to do is refer you to Baghdad. So think and strategize in this fashion in consultation with me, and you'll get much more of a response out of the military if you don't ask the wrong people the wrong kind of questions. Rosalie, you have?
Yeah. Oh. Thank you. Hi. Actually, it's a question. Can you do soft stories about the military? Like, sure. For example, if I wanted to do a story about Admiral Mullen, and here he is in his office, and this is his background.
Features, sure. You'll find with the higher-ranking people, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the commandant of the Marine Corps, the chief of staff of the Army, General Casey, or whoever it may be, they have their own personal public affairs staff for them. And so General Casey, his interest, he's in office for 4 years. His interest might be on family, Army family. He may have an interest in that there's a lot of stress and strain because the soldiers will go to Afghanistan, come home, then go to Iraq. What are some of the programs that the Army has and should have in order to maintain the strength and the resilience of families? That might be an issue for him. So to do a feature on Admiral Mullen or to do one on the Chief of Staff of the Air Force or whatever, they're happy to do that. Then it becomes a matter of time, just scheduling, because they're like a chief executive at General Motors or any large company. It's just a matter of time. But normally their public affairs person is happy to arrange that for you. Yes, sir.
My name is Klaus Scherer. I'm with ARD German Television. I want to come back to the embedded colleagues and to the annoying question that we sometimes like most. Mm-hmm. During the last Gulf War, there was a German colleague. He was in the country. He was not embedded. He was accredited. And he had a question, I guess it was about radioactive ammunition, if it was used or not. And he came to an answer of press officer who told him, "You get as many informations as you have troops on the ground." Of course, he reported that, and this was. I'm sure you would have given a better answer, but this was considered to be an accident. But it happened. And the question I have, since you were mentioning that you had the first Gulf War, the second, and we had no embedded in the first time, we had embedded ones in the second time. Is there a tendency, maybe as a side effect, not planned, that the embedded correspondents are considered to be the preferred ones because they might be the friendlier ones compared to others? Is that a tendency that might happen or might happen as a side effect?
No. And I don't mean to be too humorous on this, but the embed, I think, does a few things. Number one, it removes completely the perception that a journalist can only have access to the story if there is a public affairs officer hovering over to watch. It gets rid of that immediately. Secondly, whether we admit it or not, they are going to establish a relationship with the soldier, the squad, the platoon, no less than if they were out with the Bundeswehr at Grafenwehr. They have a shared experience. Boy, it was hot last night. It rained. That was quite a mortar attack. So once you've gone through a shared experience with anybody, even if it's getting stuck in an airport, that's your friend. So that little bit does it. The thing that's hard for the reporter, though, is objectivity. See, your guys and ladies, your job is to maintain objectivity, to tell the story to your readers back home or your viewers back home. So there is no preference to say, I want to go to Mr. So-and-so because he is embedded with that unit, as opposed to someone who is back in Baghdad in the green zone who wants to travel out for one day to interview the captain. They're both processed the same way. As I say, the plus and the minus is you get a lot of human interest stories by being embedded, but you also begin to realize the monotony of combat. 4 years is a long time. I mean, I was in Vietnam for 1 year. Every day, you're not in battle every day. The hardest challenge for leadership is to maintain the focus for the soldiers, not to be, back down, because then you worry about an IED, then you worry about a sniper because you're not focused. Plus, you're only seeing it through a straw. You are seeing what unit you are with. You are then going to report that, but you are drawing a conclusion that your experience with that squad, in that platoon, in that company, on that day in Fallujah represents that day in Iraq. It doesn't. So there's back and forth on that, back and forth. But you do get a feel more than anything you could read just by living with the soldiers. World War II had one man, Ernie Pyle. He used to live with the soldiers. And if you want to read good literature, Ernie Pyle's, he's better than television. If you read his reports to the New York World, I believe was who he wrote for. Very, very poignant writer during Normandy, World War II. And he died with the soldiers in the Pacific. But very, very good. And you were with a German newspaper? TV, okay, yeah. My oldest was born in München, so there it is.
I would ask if there are any questions from someone who hasn't asked a question. I'm hoping to wind up the briefing portion of this, but Rick and I are both going to be here as long as you'd want to keep talking. But so are there any questions from someone who's not yet asked a question, or any final questions in general? Raise your hand if you want.
I just want to say thank you, and to acknowledge Andy's invitation today. I've known the Foreign Press Center many, many years, and you have a fine, fine director here who really, really, really looks out for your interest. And I'm just delighted to be with you, Andy, and your friends.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. That's the end of the formal briefing. Rick is here for interviews. I'm here for questions as much as you need me.